Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 3 of The Horse and His Boy at the Gates of Tashbaan.
We get some good old-fashioned Tarkina storytelling. Or Tarkin.
Well, it just would be Calorman storytelling. It's part of their whole culture. Great chapter here. I really liked this chapter a lot. Easily my favorite chapter so far of the book. First two were fine, not bad. This one, honestly, man, I thought that... So I don't want to get too much into this, but this is some of Lewis's best world building, I think.
We have an amazing exposition kind of load happening here, where we get to find out all this backstory behind one of the characters, but we also move along in the plot a little bit, and then we're left moving into a pretty exciting part. It's well constructed.
Yeah, it is, and it just feels like, and I know that, as readers, we're not necessarily supposed to find a lot of things likable in Calorman. It is supposed to be, Lewis is writing it to be this society that is, juxtaposed with Narnia. We see it as being not a good place. Obviously, we're going to look at arranged child marriages here. Regularly we keep seeing slavery.
We do a suicide a little bit.
Yeah, gosh, man, this chapter did get dark. But with all of that, I will say this culture feels way more consistent than Narnia. Whereas, the big thing we always talk about Narnia is it's so many different things put together. We, go Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you find Norse mythology, and you find, I'm not going to Greek. You get all these different things, and it does feel like this kind of slapdash of mythologies and even culture. It's unclear kind of who is in charge. So they have the humans in charge, but then there's no other humans. But then when the Telmarines get there 1,000 years later, it has always been confusing a little bit. And we say that some of that is, the charm of Lewis is that we get to kind of fill in these things on our own. But here in Calorman, it actually feels like there's a much more fully flesh out culture, even down to the architecture that we.
It's much more consistent.
It is. And I know that obviously that's been part of this conversation we've talked about and how Lewis has been writing those in some of the different ways that it portrays culture. But I think the thing that surprised me that I wasn't expecting, not having read this book before, was how consistent Calorman feels as a place, as opposed to Narnia, which feels, Lewis plays kind of loose with his world building in Narnia, which isn't inherently a bad thing. But that was an interesting difference between these two places that I did not expect.
And it's curious to think about why. I wonder if this was just later on he had more experience, or if this was part of the intentional wanting to have this be a direct contrast to Narnia, where it needs to seem much more homogenous, maybe.
That's a good point, because it does seem like as each book has gone along, Lewis has done, I don't know if better is the right word, because he's not necessarily trying to do this. It's not like he fails at doing this in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. He just chooses not to. But it does seem to be that with each book, we have a little bit more of a stronger sense of world building. So by the time we get to Caspian, you have the Telmarines. And there's still a lot that's uncertain, but we do get a little more of an idea of what that culture is like. And, Dawn Treader is so different because there's so many different places they go to. But I think of especially the Lone Islands with Governor Gumpus and stuff. You do get a sense of place and a sense of society and of culture there. And then in Silver Chair, especially with the underworld and Bism, I think especially with Golg and everything, you, again, have a lot of strong world building that doesn't seem to exist in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I think that does continue here. But I do think, to your point, on top of just Lewis doing more of that with each consecutive work, I do think there is this homogenous element to the culture that makes it feel, and I think Lewis is doing that in contrast to Narnia, but that homogenous element actually makes it feel more realistic to me. I'm actually surprised at how I'm really excited for next chapter going into the city, because we've not really ever seen a city in the Chronicles of Narnia yet.
Yeah, or a crowd, really.
A crowd, like
Yeah,
exactly.
we've seen armies and battles, but not a real crowd where everyone's conducting business.
Yeah, and that's it. It really just stands out. And a lot of people have said this book is, very different compared to the rest of the Chronicles, and I feel that so far as we've read this. But wait, okay, we're talking a lot about the chapter. Let's do our summary, and then we can talk more about it. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
No, I'm doing it, right?
You're doing it. This is a very odd chapter.
Okay. All right. So here is the summary for chapter 3. Aravis begins telling Bree, Hwin, and Shaysta the story of her escape in the grand fashion of Calorman storytelling. We learn that she was arranged to be married to a 60-year-old man, even though she is only a young girl. Not wanting this future, Aravis plans to take her own life, but is stopped by Hwin, who reveals that she can speak. Hwin persuades Aravis not to take her life, but instead to run away with her to Narnia. Aravis forges a letter making it appear that she has already married her fiancé, and then runs away. Once she finishes her story, the 4 travelers continue on their journey to Tashbaan. Shaysta feels left out, while Aravis becomes increasingly annoyed with him. As they draw closer to the city, they decide they will have to conceal their identities and make their way through the settlement on their own.
Well done.
Yeah, it was a little tricky to think about. This chapter clearly has 2 different parts to it. There's this whole flashback scene, or it's not really a flashback because it's Aravis telling a story.
Right. She's telling it live.
Exactly. And then there is kind of the final part of the chapter here as they are continuing on their journeys and Shaysta is being annoyed. Not my favorite character in this chapter so far.
Who? Shaysta?
Yeah, and I haven't loved him in the book in general. He's easily my least favorite character of the 4. He kind of got on my nerves in this chapter.
So I'm curious what'll happen. I have read further than the last time we talked about
good.
this, but I have not finished the entire thing.
Fair enough.
So I don't feel like I'm at risk of spoiling stuff. But I am curious. I feel like some of the characters that have annoyed you early on end up becoming your favorite characters later on.
I don't think that's going to happen here, though.
Really?
I really like Aravis. I can't imagine her falling down this pedestal for me and putting Shaysta back up there. Shaysta, whatever. I mean, this is going to be hard this season. It's Shaysta. I listened to like multiple other podcasts and
the audiobook.
And the audiobook.
Yeah, same here.
And I heard Douglas Gresham say it. It's Shaysta.
Yeah.
But I keep wanting to say Shaysta because you always called him that before I read the book.
That's right. It's definitely my fault.
Yes, exactly.
And you've never had trouble saying words before.
No,
so
it's not. It's new for us. This is something new we'll have to deal with this season. But what were your big takeaways from this? I know we already talked a little bit, but do you have any kind of emotional reaction here?
First, I love the way that Aravis tells the story.
Yeah.
It's the very, very first time that I read it, I was a little bit annoyed just because for some reason, maybe this is from school or from people reciting stuff in my childhood, or I don't know what it is, but I tend to tune out. As soon as someone starts doing this big, grandiose way of talking, we saw it a couple chapters ago when they were starting to haggle for the price of Shaysta.
Mm-hmm.
And he just starts saying all these extra words. And it's, man, can we get to the point? But having reread it a couple times and listened to it, listening to this one on audiobook has been
the
particularly
audiobook for this?
Fun. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah. I thought you might like that.
Did you buy it?
And I'm trying to do this as much like you as possible. I've been reading this book on an e-reader, and I've also been listening to the audiobook the day of. And it's pretty fun.
I'm proud of you. That's really great.
I'd like to thank the public library for providing all of that.
You did it on what's that app called?
Libby.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
My big takeaway was I felt, hearing Aravis, there's this odd thing happening as I'm reading this, which is that I'm horrified by
the details
of Aravis's story and the reality of her situation, yet really intrigued by the culture. And we already talked ad nauseum about this already, but really just intrigued by the fact that there seems to be a lot of consistency across the board from what we've seen from chapter 1, 2, and 3 of this kind of unknown world to us as readers. And that's very interesting to me because of how it stands in contrast to the world of Narnia that we visited before. So let's jump in here. Let's talk a little bit about how this story opens. Aravis gives kind of a Matthew chapter 1 like retelling of all of her family members, right? And okay, but even this almost felt like Tolkien-esque in a way, and how kind of the names had some similarities. I'm not going to try to say them all here, but in a way that, you're like, okay, it feels like maybe there's their own language here. From what I've understood, they're just speaking English, right? Because we haven't heard anyone speak another language yet. Right. And we know that the Narnians speak English because the children speak English. But it did feel just like, it felt like there was some maybe history behind some of these names, or that they did go together well. I like that.
They also sound nice, too.
You try them. Go for it.
No, well, that is not why I was setting this up.
Oh, okay.
But they roll off the tongue pretty well, and they have a nice sound, and it sounds, at least to our ears, it sounds different. But they also don't sound completely out of left field. Yeah. Where it's not just a bunch of consonants together. I think that Star Wars does this pretty well.
Are you kidding me? I totally just go on. Sorry,
for a lot of them it does, but of course Daniel's read the DK visual guide, so you have all the like really really crazy names. But the names sound like something that would fit in that universe for the most part.
Let's take a sidebar here.
Oh boy,
to talk about bad names in Star Wars.
I'm not talking about the ones that never have their name mentioned in the movie, but are in the visual guide.
No. Okay, but we'll start with literally. And I hate that they did this in the anthology movie. Han Solo is literally called Han Solo, and he's a guy who doesn't want to work with other people. Like that's so on the nose. And again, I love Han Solo, but I think it's kind of funny how on the nose it is. Doesn't really bother me that much, but that's so. I don't know. Okay, you've got.
I didn't care for how they gave him a name in the Han Solo movie.
I did not like that. Yeah. In Phantom Menace alone, you've got Dud Bolt, the pod racer. How about C.O. Bibble?
I'd like C.O. Bibble. What was wrong with that one?
That's just a weird name. There's Ello Asti, which is from Hello Nasty, which is that Beastie Boys record. They named an alien after him.
Okay, was that mentioned in the movie?
No, but it's on the toys and stuff. There's a guy in Star Wars Rebels called Matin, or maybe it's like Mart Matin or something like that. It's, it's just Jet Porkins. Come on,
none of these names have actually appeared.
But everybody knows Jet Porkins. That's a pretty pretty famous thing. Salacious B. Crumb, Jabba's.
I love Salacious Crumb.
Salacious Crumb, come on. And he even has the middle initial, Salacious B. Crumb. I just think some of those, Newt Gunray.
Newt Gunray is pretty funny.
They're just not.
If you really think about it, Skywalker is pretty.
I know, they're not. The last one I'll say.
Either.
Solo has a character. He was just in the visual dictionary and stuff. That's name was Therm Scissor Punch. You have to just laugh at some point. I just don't think that we should be looking to. I think if you want to talk about great names, I think Dune does a great job.
Oh, really?
Some of the names, not even just of people, but of some of the different places, I really just think Herbert across the board is really great at a couple names. Obviously, Tolkien is very much at the top.
He's at the top, for sure.
Great names. I mean, he's a philologist. Obviously, he's good at that. And I think I would put Harry Potter in the Star Wars world of just really bad character names. In general, not great character names.
Yeah. But also, I feel like that's a slightly different audience. As a kid, I loved how everything had this Latin root to it, or is pulling from something history, but it was one level removed. This feels it's not as based in history, and then Tolkien seems like 2 or 3 levels removed, where he's created the mythos, and then he has pulled names from it.
That's fair. Can I mention you? While you were talking, I was only half listening because I did look up the couple of other Star Wars names that I couldn't remember off the top of my head. One, someone has paid a lot of money to make up these names, and I love that. But in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi, one of the band members is Droopy McCool.
Mm-hmm.
There is in Attack of the Clones, Elan Sleaze Bagano.
Wow.
There is, I forgot about this, Poggle the Lesser, Kit Fisto. There is a Mama the Hutt. And how could we forget this one here? From Star Wars The Clone Wars, Darth Maul's brother, Savage Opress, which I think is now pronounced Savage.
Savage.
But
yeah. I didn't care for that one. That's a great example of you're one level removed from our world.
That's not even one level removed. His name is Savage.
Half a level.
No, those are actual
they
words.
They changed it
English,
to Savage.
But it's spelled Savage.
Yeah.
Those are terrible names for characters. I'm
vehemently agreeing with you.
I hope Andrew does not listen to this episode because I know he's a really big fan of all these things. He's gonna listen to it. But these are terrible names in Star Wars. That I know we've. So, like, do you think in the meeting? Here's the meeting at Skywalker Ranch when they're coming up with this character's name. They're like, okay, we want to make sure kids know that he's a bad guy, Savage Opress, and they're going on. They're like, wait, guys, what if we pronounce it Savage?
Yeah.
And someone's like, got it. That's $1 million idea. We're just gonna pronounce. But then if you're gonna do that, why not pronounce it Savage Opress? And just like, I don't know. Just they still call him Opress. It almost is. I don't know.
And even Darth Sidious, it's just
Darth Sidious.
Insidious. Yeah. The name Sidious, yeah.
Yeah, it's not the best stuff. Yeah. Also, like with the whole fact of like in A New Hope, Leia is called both Leia and Leah by different characters, as if that no one reading the script knew how to pronounce it, and George Lucas never was like, "Hey, like we've got to settle on one thing or the other."
Yeah. I also love how they addressed that in Solo, where he says, "Oh, Han." He goes, "It's Han."
Yeah,
but that's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. They both think Han and Han. So, yeah. Doesn't Lando always call him Han?
Yeah.
Han. Gotta take the bounty as he's getting choked. Right. All right. Well, we are very far off topic here. I don't know. This feels pretty on brand for us. Yeah. But so yeah, I think we've made it through we're at the first sentence of the chapter. And
that's right.
We like the names, but let's have you go on because I'm getting us off topic here. What do we learn about Aravis as she's telling us more of her backstory?
We learned that she is in this arranged marriage with someone who's in their 60s. And part of the reason is her mother has died and she has this stepmom now. Mm-hmm. And the stepmom has kind of encouraged her father to arrange for this marriage.
And her father is pretty high up in whatever kind of system of society, whatever kind of class system they have. He's a Tarkhan as well, and her arranged marriage is to a guy who's going to take on an even higher position of what seems to be the Grand Vizier, right? Again, seeing Lewis pull from especially kind of the Arabian Nights, kind of what would have been prominent to him as a reader of ancient and medieval literature. And so, yeah, it seems. This is like dark, right? For Narnia, I'm trying to kind of rack my brain here. Have we ever come across anything like this in Narnia before? But let's not even talk about the part where she's going to take her life in a little bit. But even just the fact of like an arranged marriage between a young girl and a old man.
Yeah, this does seem to be the extreme end.
We've stayed away from.
There is dark stuff. There's. Edmund was going to be killed.
That's fair, yeah.
By the queen, and she wanted to, kind of wipe out all of them.
Yeah, Aslan's whole death itself would be up there.
Right.
But this is even like, what's odd about this is it's adamantly clear that Aravis is very uncomfortable about this and does not want this to happen. But her stepmother very much arranges this and is going to force this. And this is also the first time we've had, I think, romance at all. Not that this is obviously not romance, but I don't think we've had anything of this sort other than Caspian and Susan kissing in the movie.
In the movie,
I don't think we've had anything like this. Yeah. There's been no kind of relationship between any characters, right? Am I missing anybody?
I don't think so.
I guess all of our protagonists have been children, so it obviously makes sense.
Right. Which is part of what makes this so dark.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is if we think of Narnia as, having a lot of these roots, especially for Lewis, in kind of Western European Middle Ages, arranged marriage was the norm. That was absolutely the norm, especially amongst, you get to 12, 13, 14, that would be considered normal, And so obviously Narnia doesn't have people back in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it does. At this point, you have humans and eventually going to have Telmarines, and I wonder if the idea here is that an arranged, marriage between someone who, obviously reading this as 21st century readers were, even 20th century readers, I think it's written to be like, she's, because Shaysta even says, wait, you're young too.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder how normal this actually is in Calormen, or even Narnia, for instance, because if Shaysta has grown up in Calormen his whole life, he seems taken aback by this, like, excuse me, you're, 13, 14, however many years old. And if this was the norm, wouldn't he have been like, okay, that's what happens to, Tarkinas. So it makes me think that the idea of arranged marriage between, teenagers is not normal even in Calormen.
It does seem to be directly related to her status, class-wise, based on what Bres says.
But then, the counter that, though, wouldn't Shaysta have been like, oh, but I know that he's just kind of this guy living out in the fishing village and stuff, but wouldn't he have expected that, thinking about that, if we're supposed to make this out to be in the Middle Ages, I know it's not an allegory, but we're supposing that this magical world takes place in, let's just roughly put it in the High Middle Ages, right? Arranged marriage would be normal, even to villagers, would have been aware of this kind of thing. Oh, that's what happens to the rich and powerful, the kings, the queens, the Tarkinas. And yet again, he is kind of baffled by this, which makes almost this whole thing feel even darker to me because it's not the norm,
I think the point of that interaction that, Bree tells him, don't show your ignorance here. Shaysta doesn't know a ton, and that could be a combination of a combination of his age, but also where he is and what he has to do all day. He's not reading or talking to people. He's repairing the nets for his adopted father.
That's really well said. That this is maybe just showing us how little he knows about the world itself. Right. He's kind of like is that scene at the beginning of I don't show the movie in my class for obvious reasons, but I do show the one scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail when I introduce my kids to medieval Europe and the idea of feudalism, where the peasants are working in the field and Graham Chapman as King Arthur comes up and they're like, well, I didn't vote for you. And he's like, who made you king? That whole thing. It reminds me kind of that, of just like the ignorance of kind of being out in the countryside, not really knowing what's happening in the castle or in, and that was normal for many people. So maybe that's what's happening more. You're making me think differently than I had taken this the first place. So that's interesting. I like that take.
One thing that would help, I don't know if we'll get this because neither of us has read too much further ahead, but I wonder if we'll find out from anyone else if this appears normal.
I get the sense that this is not going to be revisited again.
Yeah.
I get the sense that Aravis's journey is about there is a piece of identity here, right? It might feel like we keep coming back to Lewis's depiction of the Calormens, but it's so prominent throughout the book, and even in like the character. So like Aravis is not rejecting her entire culture and running away. At least I don't take it to me that. I mean, again, I haven't read past this chapter, so I don't know. But it does seem like this is just her rejecting this one thing that is put upon her, which is arranged marriage. She's not like, oh, I'm so horrified by the culture that I live in, blah blah blah, and
she just doesn't want to be married.
She doesn't want to be married to this guy.
Someone in their 60s.
Fair enough, I guess. And that we obviously are sympathetic for there. And so I get the sense that her journey will be about kind of what is her identity as someone who is a Calormen traveling north into Narnia, just trying to not escape her entire culture or society, but just trying to escape this kind of future as the bride of some, creepy old guy.
Right.
So because of that, I get the sense that we're not going to be looking back for her as much as we are looking forward and then kind of sitting in the present with her as she is kind of grappling with who she is, you know, which feels very, again, the hard thing for me in reading this book, not knowing where we're going, is that actually feels like a very non-Lewisian kind of theme for the book. It feels like a very modern, almost like postmodern theme of like finding your true identity and feeling who you are. And that's, I mean, there are great books about that. I'm not saying, I'm not rolling my eyes as I say that, but it hasn't really been Lewis's, the way that he's written his characters, even in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's not about the children finding out they're queens and kings. Yeah. Did I say that right? I don't think I did.
It sounded funny.
Finding out that they're kings and queens, and then like living into that identity and just really, becoming kind of who they were born to be. It's mostly like, you're kings and queens because Aslan is good, not because of yourself. And that's often a criticism of the movies, is that they make the kids do too much stuff as opposed to Aslan being the sole, power behind all of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting that kind of vibe from this book. Again, not necessarily a critique of it, just something.
It's surprising because it doesn't match what we've come to expect.
What I've come to expect so far. And again, it could be that Lewis is going to turn that around completely in like the next chapter, and people listen to me talk for 5 minutes about this thing that's meaningless. But, but I mean, that's how I'm feeling as I hear this story.
Right.
All right, we're on, I think, the third paragraph?
Yeah. Now for the fourth paragraph.
So as we go on, we find out she's going to be married, right? And she goes into the woods. Now, she says something that's interesting here.
Yeah, she basically goes to kill herself, but then something miraculous happens. Her horse speaks.
This is such a interesting character moment for Hwin, who really has not done much in the book so far. She's been quiet. She's shy, And yet, when you really think about this, this is an extremely dangerous thing that Hwin does, because she's putting herself in danger by revealing
that she can speak.
And yet she does this out of caring for Aravis. And from what I remember, right, Hwin was kidnapped herself as a mare, right? Brought into Calormen, and yet here is someone high up in the society of Calormen who maybe Hwin would look at as an enemy, and yet Hwin doesn't do that. Instead, she does something that could potentially endanger her in order to save this other person's life. It shows really how selfless Hwin can be, which, I thought that was really almost this moment of this potential ending of Aravis's life tells us more about the horse than it does about the girl.
Right. And it also makes you wonder just enough whether or not there's this history there. Does Hwin know this girl pretty well, or is this the first time that they kind of have this time together?
Good point. So Aravis decides not to take her own life, and she gets back on Hwin, and they go back to her father.
But with a plan.
This seems a little odd to me. I thought that the best thing to do would be to just be like, all right, let's leave. Does she need to go back? I guess she has to go back and get provisions and stuff before leaving.
Yeah, and I think that the purpose of this plan that they come up with is to not only get away, but to buy them time. So if they just took off from there, they'd run out of food, and they would only have like a 20-minute head start.
That's fair.
This was to give them several days of a head start. Let's talk about how they do that.
Yeah, so she asked to go off with her maidens to make secret sacrifice. Oh, that's not a secret. She's telling everybody about it, but whatever.
Right. But you don't know the details of the sacrifice.
Oh, the sacrifices. Okay. So she's going to go make sacrifices to Zardina, the Lady of the Night, and she asked to go off alone. So I don't know if you thought about this, but I've been reading the Odyssey with my students recently, and we're getting to the part where the Phaeacians, or Odysseus lands on the island of the Phaeacians, and his first encounter is with Nausicaa. I don't know how familiar you are with the Odyssey.
No, I used to ride in one, but we were mostly a Toyota family.
All right.
It was a Sienna.
So just as a little background, Odysseus shows up, and Nausicaa is the princess of this island that he shows up on. He's lost all of his crew up to this point, and he actually shows up naked on this island, and he's got to approach Nausicaa, who is hoping to be married soon, and her maidens who are doing laundry at the river. Now, in Greek society, women would not go out often, especially by the water, because often that was a place where a lot of bad things could happen if women were left alone. Usually you would have some kind of male companion in this culture.
Even if you're going down to the river to pray? I'm trying to put this in terms of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which is as close as I can get to the actual Odyssey.
Fair enough. I have not seen that movie in many, many years. So
Okay.
I didn't we've been over this before. I feel like I should like the Coen brothers, and I've never seen a movie of theirs that I've enjoyed.
Have you watched any of them in the past 7 years?
You and I watched, what's the one with...
Inside Llewyn Davis.
Yeah.
And you didn't care for that?
I went in being like, this will be the one. This will be the movie that finally changes my opinion on them, because they are great filmmakers by like in every sense of the word. And yet I've never like actively disliked in their movies, but I've always gone, okay, I never need to see that again. I didn't love it. It was fine. And you would think even a movie like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is based on one of my favorite works of all time, with George Clooney. I mean, just everything about it is great. The music is good. And I watch this go, okay, that's fine. Yeah. I don't know what it is. It's something is wrong with me.
I feel like you should give it a rewatch maybe soon and just see where you land now.
I'll try. I couldn't even finish The Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
I haven't seen that one, so I can't.
You would think, I mean, I don't know. I'm mad at myself for it, because I want to love their movies, and I just don't. Even Fargo, I was like, it's okay. Yeah. I don't know. It's my problem. All right, so yeah, I mean, it's on me. That's all. But okay, so Nausicaa is there, and she's by the water, kind of going off in this kind of one of these last things. Only time she would be allowed to be alone as a woman right before a marriage. And so I don't think, I was trying to read into it, like, is that what's happening here with Erebus? Obviously, Lewis is extremely familiar with the Odyssey, kind of these women going off in this like pre-wedding kind of like act or chore or whatever it is, and see if there's anything, because, so far the
ritual.
The Horseman's Boy has been such an adventure story, which obviously the Odyssey is, is one of the very first, if not the first kind of story of adventure that you see in the West. And I just thought that might be a little bit of, maybe Nausicaa's only in, I think, one book of the Odyssey. I don't think she's in any other ones, but that one that she first appears in. But I wonder if Erebus is going to have any bit of this character in her. So I don't have like a cool thought to say other than like, I saw this small connection and I'm going to pay attention to it. Could be totally nothing, but hey, that's what I'm supposed to do this season, not having read the book. I'm wondering if there'll be any parallels between these characters.
Well, speaking of parallels, I have a question for you. You have a lot of story knowledge, especially classical stuff.
Okay.
So we have this moment where she's basically engaged to someone, or betrothed would probably be a better word, and she would rather kill herself than do this.
Yeah.
We've also seen a similar thing in The Princess Bride, which is much more recent. That was the late 80s, I believe. Where are both of these where are these examples being pulled from?
That's great.
So I know that there was arranged marriage, and I know that power was consolidated by two kingdoms, presenting their people, and they would marry, and then that would form a...
Oh, yeah. Like that's not even just like... that's all the way... That's even a pretty... even in Western society, like the idea of not having arranged marriages to consolidate power is relatively new, right? Yeah. I mean, you see that just in the last few centuries. You can see that. I don't know though off the top of my head, and maybe I'll think about it once we're done recording. All of a sudden, like, oh yeah, that's it, and then we'll come back and say, oh, here's our addendum here. Maybe I'd love to hear from our listeners though. I can't off the top of my head think of a work that Lewis would have been familiar with that has. Is kind of, that's kind of downstream from this major work and stuff. Because a lot of the things Lewis does, he is pulling from some of the stuff that he loves. I mean, that's even with his mythologies and everything. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, honestly.
Oh, someone let us know.
Yeah, someone else maybe can be thinking of where we're getting that. Yeah, I mean, I forgot about The Princess Bride. Another movie. I've not seen that movie since probably I was like 12 years old.
Yeah. That's a great movie to
watch.
Saw it
so many times as a kid.
On the bus with a church group.
Yeah?
Yeah. That was the movie. Probably watched it 12 times.
I watched Happy Gilmore at my church once. I don't know how we got away with that.
No.
I think we had the youth group met in a basement, and there was one time where the high schoolers were watching us, and there were no adults. They're like, you guys want to watch Adam Sandler? And I was like, yes. It was
yes, please.
This was like 2001 or something.
So you like Happy Gilmore, but you don't like the Coen brothers. Let's just...
Dude,
appreciate that for a moment.
I love Happy Gilmore. Some of those 90s Adam Sandler's movies, I think it's just because of when we grew up, but I find some of them to be some of the funniest movies ever, despite the fact that they probably really aren't objectively.
And I think there are two parts to that. One, you're not going to go back and rewatch them because that would change your opinion.
I rewatched Billy Madison like 5 years ago, and Anna and I, it held up. It was
Really?
hilarious.
Oh, wow.
Again, I don't know if I'm just laughing because I used to laugh so much as a kid.
I think that is part of it. I really do think that
it.
The biggest factor with a lot of these things is when we watch them. For example, we watched Dumb and Dumber, and the people who had watched it when they were 5 and 6
can't stand it. I don't like
they
it.
They were laughing so much, but people like you didn't watch it at that age.
Yeah, I first saw it, I was like 25, and I was like, I don't get it. It's really like it is dumb, and it's not for me. All right, so let's finish out Aravis's story here. As we have shown that we are storytellers that have no sense of the grand tradition of the Calormans, because we have taken quite a long time to get through Aravis's own story. Right. But she goes off. She's going to do this sacrifice and kind of buys herself a couple of days here, right? And in doing so, she gets one of her maidens, or like a servant, to write this letter saying that she met her fiance, or that he met her on the road while she was going to make this sacrifice, and he married her on the spot. He would like the dowry, and why don't you come meet us when you get a chance?
Right.
So not only she bought herself these 3 days to go do the supposed little sacrifices here, she's also bought herself even more time, because now that letter's got to make it, and then her father's got to come out. And she's actually, this is it's kind of intricate here and a little complex, but it's a pretty wise plan for what appears to be like a 13-year-old, you know?
Right. Pretty resourceful.
I was very impressed, because I had to go back and read it once more, be like, okay, wait, what's the plan again? And then I read through, and I was like, oh, this is a great plan. Aravis is great. I love this character a lot.
Yeah.
So that is when so after this plan has been carried out, that's when they meet up with Shaysta and what's the other horse's name? Bree, right? They meet up with Shaysta and Bree, and the whole lion encounter from the very last chapter. There's only 2 interruptions of her story, by the way. So again,
and they're both from Shaysta.
No, one of them's from Hwin, who, like, remember after she says,
oh yeah, she said, well, it wasn't quite as grand.
She's like,
as
I wasn't as I didn't use those kind of words. And Bree is the one who's like, you guys need to stop talking. If Bree was on the podcast with us, he would be very upset about how much movies we've talked about already today.
Right.
Like, you guys need to stay on topic. I don't want to hear this. This is great storytelling. He's the guy at the theater that, like, if you even like, oh, that was a really cool part. Hey, excuse me, stop talking.
Right.
Right. I am more like Shaysta at the movies. You don't like to sit next to me at the movies often.
Because
I just like I'm like, oh, that cool. I'm not a movie talker in the movie theater. I'm very much a movie talker. If we're on the couch together,
you can even say it with a straight face.
have been no. When we're at the movies, I want to be respectful. When if you're watching a movie in my house, it's my remote control. Like, you will have, like, sorry guys, especially for you. I don't feel bad for you and Sarah. If you guys choose to not have a TV in your own house, you have to abide by my rules of my TV in my own house.
So it was enough. It was enough that it took us 10 months to watch the Lord of the Rings, the extended versions together. But it took even longer because you kept pausing it and pointing stuff out.
Look, any other listeners on our show know that if you watch The Two Towers, you have to pause it with everyone to go, hey, this is where Viggo Mortensen broke his toe when he kicked that Uruk-hai helmet.
Right.
And
that one's a gimme. The really funny ones are, this isn't actually in the book. Or this is an extended scene. Okay, the extended scene's over.
I want you to know when it's an extended scene. Or this is a brand new scene. You should know these things.
Yeah.
I find myself to be a great commentator. I enjoy my own commentary.
Yes,
I love hearing myself talk, which is really why we started this podcast.
I know. This is one of the slides in the PowerPoint you made to
convince you.
To convince me that you didn't even have to use.
All right. Well, so Aravis's story is now over. She was only interrupted twice, once by Hwin and once by Bree.
Well, first,
Shaysta.
I do really want to talk about those interruptions.
Yeah.
I think that was so well done. She's talking. She's telling a story about what happened, but they keep bringing us back, but they don't bring us back to the present too much. They just do it a little bit so that you feel like you're actually sitting there listening, and it breaks up the long stretches of kind of Calorman storytelling there.
Yeah.
And that makes it has a really nice feel to it.
Yeah.
It feels like you're actually overhearing this conversation, or you're sitting right there by the horses.
Oh yeah, I definitely felt that. I thought that was a really, really neat thing. I'm more. I just love that Shasta. He's like, well, what was in that letter? She's like, hey, I'm getting to it. All right.
And Bree points
Bree's
out,
like, you
I
gotta
will tell
wait.
you when the time comes.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Or
that was
she
really
will tell
fun.
us. Yeah.
Well, this actually is a good way to talk about their relationships after the story is over, and now as the chapter is kind of wrapping up, they start talking about, or they start moving closer towards Tashbaan, and Bree and Aravis get along really well. They like kind of have, it's like when you first meet somebody that you have a mutual friend and then you realize you have a ton of mutual friends, or like someone who like went to the same school that you did, like, but 2 years after you, and you're like, oh, we didn't know each other, but like, oh, do you know them? Oh, of course I know them. Oh, what'd you think of, Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so? Were they a good teacher? That kind of thing. And this is all happening while Quinn's just listening, but Shasta's getting really grumpy that he is left out of the conversations. And Lewis, as the narrator, tells us, like, no one's meaning to do that. He just doesn't have these shared experiences. He's this, like, this farm kid.
Yeah. And you get a little bit of the history, too. You also get a taste of Bres' personality here. It adds to what we already know about him, where he'll kind of be a little more firm, but he also is very opinionated, and he has some opinions about horses that pull chariots. They're not real cavalry.
Oh, yeah.
And just that's a great amount of detail for me. I don't want to know the full history
He's a little
of all the horses,
right?
and like how everything went, but that's enough of a detail for me to wonder a little bit. And, if you're listening, pause it, or if you're reading it, just like take a moment and think, wow, so there's a hierarchy
of horses.
Oh
yeah. It seems
and
like they're definitely...
they kind of look down on other horses, and I really enjoy that.
I love some of the way that Bree thinks as a little bit of, he kind of has this sense of, well, I don't think he doesn't have a sense of humor necessarily, but it brings humor to the story, especially, as they decide eventually later on in the chapter, they're going to come up with the plan that they do, and they have to get some like provisions, and Shasta says that he calls it stealing and Bree calls it raiding, right? So like he always kind of does all the mental gymnastics necessary to be like, I'm always the good guy, I've never done anything wrong, and
right.
just I feel like he rolls his eyes a lot too. He's kind of like this grumpy old man a little bit.
Right. But he's also a war horse, so he's probably earned it a little bit.
Yeah, it seems
that's a great combo.
Sure. Well, let's talk about this dilemma that the four of them face as they get closer to the city. Obviously, the best thing would be to not have to go through the city. But we kind of hear that going south of the city and going north of the city really will not be a great idea for kind of a multitude of reasons here. And so then they decide, okay, they're going to have to just kind of conceal themselves in a way to get through the city itself.
Right. To which Shasta adds, we'll probably need a disguise. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if this is just a really smart move, or if he is excited about dressing up in disguises.
I mean, I think, this has to also be a more stressful... I don't know. I'm trying to figure out like who this is the most stressful for as they're about to go into the city. And maybe we can talk about this more in the next chapter because, Aravis is famous and not like super famous, but she's like wealthy and high up. Yeah. And so someone could, and we even kind of hear as they're at the very end of this chapter, like she even holds herself kind of in a way that she looks like royalty, right? Same with Bree. It's kind of hard for him to not look like a war horse. Whereas, Shasta looks like a farm boy, but he also is not from Calormen, so he sticks out in that way, right? And so I'm trying to go like, who is this? And I don't really know. Maybe we'll find out in the next chapter. But this actually seems like really there's not like an easy. They've got to get into some trouble in the next chapter because I can't imagine this just being going perfectly all the way through. I think it's all going to fall apart in the next chapter.
It does seem like there are a number of potential hijinks.
Sure.
That'll happen, yeah.
Well, any other thoughts on this chapter in particular before we move on to chapter 4?
Yeah, so one last detail, just the way the horses have to be disguised, part of it involves cutting their tails off.
That's awful. I hate that.
They just really don't like it. And they don't want to go to Narnia in this unpresentable state.
Sure.
And it hurts. Apparently you can't just snip the tail off. There's a lot of tail hair pulling.
Ugh.
And
Yeah,
it sounds really awful.
Yeah.
And they really want to kick the kids, but they can't because they know better.
Yeah.
That's an enjoyable detail as well.
Well, in that whole scene, Hwyn is very Susan-like, where she's like, "Hey, look, I know we don't want to get to Narnia in this kind of condition, but we got to get there." So she's got that kind of sensible attitude that we often saw in Susan. So, all right. Well, I think this is a great place for us to end our discussion of this chapter as they are, getting to the city, and Shaysta in that last line is like, "Hey, just remember not to talk here." Which is really condescending, honestly, because
I feel
Bree
like
and Hwyn have done this their entire lives in Calormen. He's like, "Hey guys, y'all need to really it's Shaysta who is the most out of place here."
Right. And I think that's why he says it, because he's
nervous,
tired of
yeah.
everybody telling him what to do, and he's like, I need to say something to them as well, and he says something super obvious.
That's fair. I think that totally makes sense. All right, Phil. Well, what do we have next time in Chapter 4?
Chapter 4 is Shaysta falls in with the Narnians.
He falls in with the Narnians, and I guess it's my turn to try to figure out what's going to happen next. So I've looked at this chapter title, and I don't think this actually surprised me. I'm a little stumped here because I didn't think we would meet any Narnians till the end of near the end of the book. So I'm a little confused. But here's what I've decided is going to happen in the next chapter. They're going to get into the city, and everything's going to go poorly. They're all going to be split up. And Shaysta, who has been our main protagonist, is going to get through the city. He's going to be the only one that makes it through, or at least that we're following through. And as he gets out of the city, he's going to think he's in even greater danger as he stumbles upon a group of talking beasts. And that is going to be kind of his new companions. I know eventually he has to meet back up with Bree at least. And I assume Aravis and Hwyn will come back. I don't know, but I have a feeling that he's going to have to find Narnians on the other side of the city, and then there'll be some new characters that kind of join us along the way.
All right.
So that's my guess for
Good
the next
guess.
chapter. Well, we also have, before we go, we have a little bit of listener feedback. We have a message over on Patreon from Caleb, and so I'm going to read that for us today. And it is, again, a lot of great. We have not forgotten about the silver chair. We are still talking about the Lady of the Green Kirtle. So, Phil, I read this message, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, okay?
Let's hear it.
So what Caleb writes. Hi, Daniel and Phil. I'm a new patron who is a junior in high school from North Texas, and I was just writing in to draw a connection between Chapter 12 of The Silver Chair and an essay in The Weight of Glory on transposition. Now, the Lady of the Green Kirtle's argument that Narnia is not real and that they were only dreaming about things that really existed in the Underland mirrors the confusion of a boy in the essay. Lewis tells the story of a woman who is locked in a dungeon with her baby son, and as the baby grew up, the woman draws with pencil and paper pictures of the outside world and shows them to her son. Now, after years of this, she realizes that her son is not aware of the fact that the real world is not made of pencil lines. And when she tells her son, he is shocked, for the only means for him to understand the outside world was suddenly taken away. And so he concludes that it must be empty and devoid of anything good, not realizing that it is much more full and beautiful than anything he has ever seen or imagined. Lewis then says, speaking of heaven, so with us we shall not know what we shall be, but we may be sure we shall be more, not less, than we were on earth. I think this applies to the silver chair because when the children are being tempted to think that there is nothing higher than the dreary region of the Underland, they begin to believe that Narnia was a mere dream taken from the things in the Underland. This mirrors the boy in the story's confusion about what the real world is like. Often as Christians, this is how we can be tempted to think about the new heavens and the new earth. However, Lewis's brilliant analogy reminds us that what is coming is as superior to earth as real mountain ranges are, greater than pencil drawings of them. Further up and further in, Caleb.
Wow.
Speaking of brilliant,
What a great connection.
Caleb is a junior in high school, and this is some of the deepest philosophical stuff we've ever had on the show.
Yeah. Thanks, Caleb.
This is great. And Caleb, thank you also for supporting the show. I know what it's like to be a high schooler. And it's not a time when you're usually rolling in the dough. And so thank you so much for supporting us with your hard-earned money. We really appreciate that.
We do.
What do you make of this, though, Phil? There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, and it reminds me of is it the allegory of the cave?
By Plato, yeah.
By Plato, and just seeing the shadows. And it reminds me that the world that we have here is not our final destination, and that we are not, things are going to be way better than we can even imagine. And we get taste of this, but it just makes me look even more forward toward the life after this one.
Yeah, one thing that stuck out to me that I hadn't thought about until Caleb, sent us this message was that there's like this lack of humility in response in the little story he tells here, where obviously this boy is shocked to learn that what he has kind of imagined about the world is not exactly how it is. Same with, the children. As they learn about Narnia and they hear about it from the Lady of the Green Kirtle saying it's all real. And it's Puddleglum's humility that allows him to really see past this. At least that's part of it. There's a lot of things happening there, but I hadn't thought about it this way. In the same way that a lot of times our response, even if you think about what Plato's saying in the allegory of the cave, and as that the prisoner escapes and then is able to come back and stuff, there is this often lack of humility about discovering that there's more than what you know. A lot of times, especially as 21st century, humans, we're almost like baffled that we don't know everything. Because right in front of me is a computer and I have my cell phone right over here and I have almost limitless knowledge at my fingertips. So when something as big as like a worldview shift or even just some kind of sense of reality is even presented, right? Or even it's just a narrative or something, that all of a sudden you're like, well, I've never thought of it that way. There's like often this tendency within us to react negatively and not thankfully. Of like, well, I'm so glad that I am learning something new, but instead like, how could I not have known this? And I do this. I'm not like, this isn't me.
The pride comes in.
Yeah, this isn't me like preaching to other people. I'm saying this to myself because I often respond more with arrogance or even like shame of not being aware of something instead of like, joy or graciousness that I am now, I know something new, right? In the same way, and I think that's a big part. Obviously, humility is a huge part of the Christian faith. And so I was thinking a lot about that as after Caleb had sent us this email. So Caleb, thanks so much for sending us. There's great thoughts that you have here. Man, that chapter was so good. We are still talking about chapter 12 of The Silver Chair
right,
months and months later. Wow.
Yeah.
Might be my favorite chapter in all the Chronicles, I think.
Isn't it fantastic that something written so long ago is still
It was like 70
so
years. It
relevant?
wasn't that long ago.
Okay, well, not everyone reads stuff from 2000 BC here.
That's fair. But like, at 70 years doesn't feel that,
I feel like there was a lot of just kind of pulpy
You got
stuff
Beowulf
coming
right
up.
next to your Chronicles of
Yeah,
Narnia.
that's
right
your
here.
copy.
Yeah, that's fair, but still.
They're both your copy.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, any other thoughts, Phil, before we wrap up today's episode?
No, I'm looking forward to the next one.
Why don't you do our end credits?
All right. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Margaret, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to thenarniapodcast@gmail.com, or if you want to leave a voicemail, 406-646-6733. A review on Apple Podcasts would also be appreciated. It helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 4.